10 years ago, almost to the day, the United Nations Security Council convened, and being seized of the matter, they approved and adopted the roadmap, and approved and adopted the concept of the quartet, and approved and a concept of path away from the raging intifada and toward peaceful coexistence with respect and dignity, and most importantly, safety. That's what the roadmap was about. That's what the UN Security Council said and did. And it was, I repeat, seized, legally seized of the matter. And within a month, the PLO and the other, not PLO not being a country, the PA not being a country, but allies, using the UN General Assembly system under the concept of a democracy, one country, one vote, that means Israel loses, they adopted a question. And the question I will repeat to you because it is instructive. It's what brings us to this palace 10 years ago. It's what haunts us and will continue to haunt us because of the heirs of the framing, the heirs of the adoption, the heirs of the acceptance of jurisdiction, the heirs of the analysis, the heirs of the maligning of Israel and the Jewish people, and the heirs of its application, as even today we hear cries, tear down that wall, Mr. Prime Minister, likening the wall to the Berlin Wall, but more relevantly, likening the wall to the segregation in South Africa, because the effort has been to paint Israel as this apartheid, racist, criminal state. And using the UN organs, and at Durban, and before that at Nairobi, and before that at 75, the pattern has been to make it clear that racism is indeed a crime, and it is. And to make it clear that Israel is a racist state, ergo, Israel commits crimes. That leads to crimes for charges of crimes against humanity, charges of crimes, of war crimes, charges, and who knows what's coming. So with this question, I repeat to you, what are the legal consequences? A question, a legal question or a political question. What are the legal consequences arising from the construction of the wall being built by Israel, the occupying power with a capital P, giving it a defined term, in the occupied Palestinian territory, capital O, capital P, capital T, including in and around East Jerusalem with a capital E, Jerusalem with a capital J, as described in the report of the Secretary General. And it was the report of the Secretary General that was given to the UN General Assembly. That report is so biased. It gives no deference to the judicial decisions pending in the Israeli legal system. It gives no deference to the reason why the terrorism prevention security fence was constructed to save lives. This question came here to the Peace Palace. And so 10 years ago, some of us had the sad honor, the sad privilege to be outside of the Peace Palace, standing next to an egged, burned out bus brought here to The Hague. And for those who couldn't get inside the Peace Palace, and for the Israeli government officials who decided not to attend because they would not give dignity to what they perceived and called to be a charade, and properly and thoroughly contesting the jurisdiction of the court, we marched away from the Peace Palace, down the street to the old City Hall at The Hague, and working in cooperation with the wonderful Hague-based organization, a non-governmental, non-profit organization, CIDI, the Center for Information and Documentation on Israel. We went to the old city hall in The Hague, and we held hearings with a small h, hearings on behalf of victims of the Second Intifada. And we brought people here to The Hague who had lost lives, lost limbs, lost families. And we asked them in the presence of members of the European Parliament to tell their story, to testify, if you will. We asked them to show us the photos of their families. We asked them to tell us what it was like. And the members that were there, 2 members of the European Parliament brought by CIDI, 1 member of the Dutch Parliament brought by CIDI, they came, they gave remarks, and they sat there on the stage as they heard this testimony. And I remember like it was yesterday, one of the fathers reaching into his pocket and taking out a bullet. And he said, and I paraphrase, "This is the bullet that went through the eye of my child." He came to The Hague for justice. He came to The Hague for the opportunity for someone to listen. He cried. We cried. The members of the European and Dutch Parliament present cried, and maybe for the first time they got it. This was February 2004, about to be 10 years. In June of 2004, the Israeli High Court of Justice issued the Beit Sorek decision, where it analyzed the reasons for the construction of the fence, the reasons for the construction of concrete in certain areas. It went through the proportionality arguments. It went through the various factor tests, the 3-factor test that applied as to whether or not what was being constructed was proportional to what was being faced. And it concluded that it was. And it wrote an extensive opinion on terrorism being the necessary evil that resulted in the necessary action to construct the terrorism prevention security fence, which the United Nations prefers to call a wall, even though you all know and I know, and the statistics are 2 things that are important. 1, less than 5 to 6% is a concrete barrier. And it's only a concrete barrier where it must be, and where the Israeli High Court in multiple decisions has forced and ordered the relocation of that wall. It has been relocated, and the most recent decision, the Berlin decision, calls for the wall not to be built as a concrete wall. The second thing that was clear about that decision is that it was sent here to The Hague. It was provided to the International Court of Justice. They had it, and they chose, when they issued their opinion 10 days later on July 9th, 2004, my friends, they chose to ignore it. So I ask you a question here on the grounds of the Peace Palace. With great respect for the International Court of Justice, with great appreciation for the director of the Peace Palace Library, who has welcomed us here. And I was cautioned by Professor Wedgwood, don't go to court and tell the judges they're wrong, because they won't welcome you back. 10 years ago, we were here to speak out for the victims. 10 years ago, we were here to see the bullet. And today, 10 years later, Israel, in the midst of negotiations, is threatened with what? A 3rd intifada. And Israel is threatened with what? All of these actions by the Palestinian Authority, which has signed an executive order changing its name to the State of Palestine. All of these petitions, 13 I'm told, to go to UN venues for various further upgraded status. This isn't an issue about whether or not the Palestinian people are entitled to statehood. This isn't an issue about whether the Palestinian people are entitled to dignity and human rights, or self-determination. This is an issue, my friends and my fellow members, proud members of the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. This is an issue about what I propose to you as the need for each and every one of us to stand up, to speak out, to speak proud, to make sure that people understand one thing. This is the cover of my book called The Hague Odyssey that's just been published. Take a look at the photo. In that bus, there were real people, Israeli citizens on their way to work, to school, to teach, to live, to love, to learn. Real people. This book, The Hague Odyssey, puts in context the history, but it puts in context the focus of the injustice that has been done to the state of Israel, a member state of the United Nations, which did not consent to the jurisdiction of the court to hear this question, which challenged the jurisdiction of the court, but moreover, which is, in my opinion, the state of Israel is one of the greatest respectors of dignity, of human rights, of justice, of the rule of law. Do we know of any case where the International Court of Justice has failed and refused to give any deference, any dignity to the decision of the highest courts of the land of one of its members, and failed and refused in dealing with a non-consensual case in an advisory opinion to even consider what was said? The justices said it's Israel's fault. They chose not to come. The victim becomes the perpetrator. The justice said it's Israel's fault. They only contested jurisdiction. But this court, the International Court, had an obligation, I suggest to you, to be the fact-finding court. And all it had to do is look to the Beit Sur decision of the Israeli High Court. And all it had to do is read the newspapers to understand that the reason the wall, the separation barrier, but not the segregation barrier and not a border, the reason for the construction of the terrorism fence was simply for three things. One, to fence out the terrorists. Two, to save lives. And lastly, to do what we argued and continue to argue, to exercise Israel's right and obligation, like every other nation state of the world, to protect her people with dignity, with respect, with a commitment to justice, and with an unwavering commitment to a better future for all humanity. Thank you very much.